in law because that's my background. I want to do some basic things and I'll take questions. If I don't see your hand, go ahead and shout out, or maybe I might see a chat, but I have a lot of windows open, so I want to make sure that I have what you need. So let me do it this way. We're going to talk about some research methods. You may or may not know some of this stuff. I'm specifically going to attach it to PPA because you have a little different area of research. You aren't all scholarly and peer-reviewed kind of things. So I want to make sure you understand some things. So I'm going to talk about things like how you start your research steps. You may or may not know this or remember it, but it's kind of a process. And if you do the process correctly, it makes it a lot easier for you. I'm going to give you some little computer tips. I'm going to talk about different types of information because if you know what you might need, it kind of lets you focus in where to start. And then in this day and age, we call you start to discover information, which means you have to work a little harder to get what you want because you kind of stumble across a lot of stuff before you find the good stuff. And I'm going to talk about the basics of APA. Then I'm going to break you a little groups and you're going to go to the escape the research Zoom rooms to see if you can do what I talked about. A topic. You pick a topic. You want to write about it. Well, you need to probably do a little more prep than that because sometimes a topic is too big or too small. I've had topics as small as I need stuff on painted ponies and their relationship to theology. We found exactly one article that existed out there, as into things like I want to write about Obamacare, which if you looked in the government information, there were like 85,000 volumes of stuff on that. So sometimes you need to evaluate your size and maybe figure out the focus. Do you want it in a different discipline? Do you want it from the economical point of view, from the administration point of view, from the political science point of view, from the study of people and how they react? There's different ways of studying a topic, and we have different databases that focus on those different ways. So sometimes thinking about that may make a difference on your topic. And probably the most important piece that I find people struggle with the most is the vocabulary. You're typing in a computer and it only looks for the words you type in, which seems to be a little bit of a problem. I reminded everybody last night, does everybody know what public employees used to be called up to about the 70s, maybe the 80s? Does anybody have an idea? You can drop it in chat. Maybe you haven't talked about this yet, but we have a lot of stuff on civil service. And that's what they used to call public employees that worked for the state or the local government, civil service employees. And so sometimes computer doesn't understand the difference between civil service and public employees. So thinking about your vocabulary is important. I've got some little tricks that I'm going to give you to help you figure out if you're not sure how to deal with your topic. Okay. Computer things, and you all do and by just typing your words in. The computer defaults to and, so each word that you type in and the next one and the next one, they need to be there. Okay. Not is a great way to use if you find something that probably isn't what you want. I actually work with recreation department and they teach a international children's play. So the word play is a problem because we don't mean theater. We don't mean scripts. We mean children who are playing together. So sometimes we have to say not theater or not play scripts to get rid of the stuff that is not dealing with recreation, shall we say. All our databases have filter and refinements. Google has a filter. It's a time you get last month, last year, last 3 years, and that's about it. Our filters on our databases that we pay for, purchase for you, have a lot of filters. They may do language, location, geography. They might do subject headings, which are sometimes more precise. They do, I don't know, peer-reviewed, scholarly, trade publications, which I'm going to talk about all in a minute. They allow you to focus where you want or the type of information that you want to get. Very helpful in defining things and getting more precise information. Or is another one that people forget about. So if you're saying you're doing something on the EU, which is also called the European Union, I would say EU or European Union to make sure I get both ways it's phrased in the computer. Or and not or work in Google or any other search engine, just so you know. The other one that I find more helpful than most is phrase searching. That's where I put something in quotations. Did somebody have a question, or we're just having, no? Okay. When I like European Union, I would put in quotations because remember I said and is the default. So it would have been European and Union, which may not have gotten what you wanted, the European Union. So if I put quote European Union unquote, I get more precise results. So it works very well with phrases, and public administration is another good example. So I would recommend that you go ahead and think about that. Subject terms is still the absolute bestest, the worstest, the most excellent way of finding the best articles. Google is self-promoting. Things go on Google because somebody put it there. It's a great marketing tool. Our databases that we purchase are different. They look at, by topic, what journals fit that discipline and cover every single article in that journal. By doing that, the author, not the author, but the people who put the stuff in the database also read the articles and determine what that article is really about. So I was talking to a group about environmental policy. Environmental policy on Google was 1 trillion hits. Environmental policy in quotes was still 1 trillion hits. Our databases were still more than we ever would look at. But then I limited it to subject environmental policy. And one of the first articles that came up was about a previous California governor who was looking at climate change and the laws that needed to be presented to make that climate change happen. As we all know, environmental policy takes laws, and climate change is a piece of environmental policy. Nowhere did that article use the terminology environmental policy, but it was on track for what we were looking for. Policies that deal with environmental change. So subject terms help you get better results, and I will show you how to take and do that. Are there any questions at this point? Anybody? That's all review for you? Okay, I'm going to continue then. The next thing I'm going to talk about, oh, I see somebody in the chat. Wow. Thank you. I'm glad it helps. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the type of documents that exist out there. The majority of your work are articles out of either, I've got lots of different types of articles. We can do things out of what I call the rags, which I hope you're not using. Libraries do collect them because they're kind of pop culture. I know what I'm talking about. As you exit the grocery store, they're all there with all the famous people on them, and they're talking about whatever. News is another very important thing. We've got news sources, newspapers. That's a way to get very, very quick information that just happened. The two that you will find most helpful and that you can actually limit to are what I call trade or professional, or scholarly, or peer-reviewed. Now, they're different things. They do different things. Trade or professional will help you a lot out in your profession. I read my trade, my professional magazines. They're not research articles, but they're like articles on how we did this, how we succeeded this, how we failed at this. One I look at every month when it comes out is what book reviews are most important. What books do I need to have in my collection? So I can give you the best things. So there's one, the Journal of AWWA, the Journal of American Waterworks Association. They're talking about water affordability challenges. I think that's an old issue, but doggone it, it's still a problem. PA Times is put out by the American Public Administration Association for their professionals. So when you belong to an association or profession, you quite often have a trade publication that has really good articles in it. The flip side is the scholarly or peer-reviewed. And this is the cream of the crop. These are the A++ papers. Public Policy and Administration by the American Public Administration Association is a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. Those articles have a methodology, they have an outcome, they have charts, tables, all that kind of thing that would help someone understand what they were trying to figure out in getting to that concept that works. I'm sorry, my mail is dinging at me. What you might want to think about is publishers of scholarly peer-reviewed articles have gotten so fussy about them. They want to maintain the quality that's incorporated in the thought that it's a peer-reviewed scholarly article, that authors who have been caught faking their results in their article, when the publisher goes back and asks, okay, we've had people questioning how you got these results. Can you give us the data? And they admit they faked it. The publisher turns to them and says, you no longer have a peer-reviewed article. We're going to remove it from our publication. They'll even take it a step further. Anybody that's in their publications who cited that article to build their research on, they quite often will remove that article because it's based on bad research. It's becoming much more common, and we're seeing lots of articles that are disappearing. When the journals were on paper, they couldn't do that. They'd probably send a error sheet that we'd have to log in with a paper and kind of stick it in there and say this article has wrong or false information. But it's become very interesting how they treat articles and the quality of articles. Another thing that's out there that's probably well aware is books or reports. They're kind of good for background, history, trends. They are not quick. Newspapers are the quickest. Trade publications are the second quickest. Research articles are the next quickest, and then books and reports come after that. For if you want something that happened fairly quick, not going to happen. You want to watch, especially with reports, if you don't know who, you need to know who the authorship is of it. You need to figure out their editorial background. They're biased. There's a lot of government publications on the web out there. Our federal government is the biggest publisher in this country. We are a full depository for the federal government and the state of California government. So when you look in our catalog, you will find these publications, which make them a little bit more easier than finding them on Google, say. The other thing you might be aware of is, I'm going to talk about encyclopedias. You see the Sage Handbook of Public Administration on the screen. I talked about trying to understand my topic and how to break it down and what vocabulary might work. We've got several good public administration encyclopedias, and they're like 4 or 5 pages about the topic, and they break it down for you. They also might include a bibliography of the best sources to start with. They consider key to that topic or subject. And then it helps you kind of, if you read through them, get vocabulary that you can use in the databases to find the better information. So I want you to be aware of those. I'll also, when I get into discovering information, I'll talk about how I have pulled what I consider by topic some key sources or reports that are viable sources that have been recognized for a long time as viable sources on the web. The other thing I want to talk about is information. People are a point of information. Somebody has to write that. Artificial intelligence writing hasn't quite got that far yet. It still needs people to produce the information to even AI it. So they are probably the ones that would be your most contemporary. They may be pre-publication. You know a colleague who went to the board meeting, city board meeting last night, and they can come back and give you information probably before it makes the press. They're sometimes harder to find, and I will not lie to you, social media sure has helped in this way. A lot of associations, you can tell the authors because they have about them and they give you who does their research for them and their background, usually contact information. APA has ways of citing social media, blogs, web blogs, persons, if you interview them by phone, if you interview them in person, email, all those things have been accepted by the APA for citing information. And that's what you want to think about when you're citing a person. Probably not the most common and probably the least way that you will get information, but sometimes that is the way to get the information. Statistics, that's one of my faves. I track statistics, and I will show you the research guide, which has about 3,000 pieces of statistical data on it. Federal and state government produce a lot of the statistics. The problem is that now you have to interpret the statistics, but quite often in a research report, a scholarly article, they will have statistics, and that'll help you determine if it's a valid thought. Did they get to the right interpretation of those statistics and data? They are also in time series. Does anybody, you can put this in chat, I know you know this. What is the longest running time series of data collected in the US? And I'll give you a hint, every 10 years.
Is it the census?
It sure is. We're familiar with the census population, which is required by federal law to maintain representation in the House of Representatives. But if you didn't know, the census also puts out census of government, census of transportation, census of travel, census of housing, census of business, census of industry. They put out a whole lot of data series that kind of tracks things. So I want you just to be aware of it. And just so you know, I'm glad you guys are aware of the census. They have some great data. I actually teach a couple classes on how to use them because it's a viable source. It's a good source. There. Okay, I'm going to stop at this point to see if there are any questions. I've talked about basics of getting started your topic, how to get the computer to give you what you want, and I'm talking based on our databases, not Google, and the different types of information sources that exist out there, that we have access to pretty much all of them. Any questions about that stuff? Okay. You make it too easy. Librarians expect questions. That's what we're known for taking care of. Questions. Okay. We're going to start to discover information. So as you notice, this is a research guide. Look at the address. It's .com. You can no longer count on a research address to give you what you need because there was a problem with the elderly not being able to find the Social Security Administration because they were doing socialsecurity.com. Guess what? It's supposed to be socialsecurity.gov. So the government went out and bought up all the .coms that fit the government agencies that people need the most. Insider, the one they could not purchase was whitehouse.com. It's actually a porno site. Just so you know, it's an interesting dichotomy. I'm going to now talk about finding stuff here. Do I have anything else? Yes. So I'm going to actually go change this and stop sharing this and go live. Real computerized live. So I'm hoping most of you are familiar with the library webpage. I gave you the direct address because I'm talking about the databases. We have 335 of them. But I'm talking about the research guides. we've taken, and I have a public administration, that's why I showed you, a public administration research guide that only gives you about 7 of the 335 databases, because you find that you'll find a good 85 to 90% of your stuff by using those, and then you don't have to struggle. So if you don't remember the address, you can always click on research guides. Change, yep. You can scroll down to public administration, pick it. There's other data sets here, or you can type in at the top, public administration. It'll take you to it, and it'll get you to this guide. Okay. I want to show you a couple things. I'm going to talk about APA, but here it is on the home page. If by chance you need to write an annotated bibliography, here's some things on how to read an article if you don't understand what the structure of a scholarly article. If you have access requirements from home, I need to make sure that's current. I think it is. I also mentioned citation tracking. That's a newer way. Instead of subjects, you use citation tracking. Very easy to do, and I'll mention it when I talk about databases. Well, for the most part, what you want to use is the second tab called Get Sources. This is the list of the databases that I recommend to you. Not to say that you might need others, but this is probably, these 4 right here will get you most of your work. If you're doing just policy, it's a little the same here, but not necessarily. If you're doing anything that you want a current issue on, these might help you. Okay. But I'm going to talk about these guys, and now what I talked about earlier may make a lot more sense. So the Public Policy Administration Abstracts covers all the public policy administration, well, not all of them, but the major majority of them. Be aware it's international. Public administration in England or Singapore is very different than public administration in the United States. So when you look at, you'll see references to journals that are outside the United States, and maybe based on your topic, you may not want to do that geography, if that makes sense. I'm going to show it to you, but if you forget what the databases do, we put these little eyes on here. So they kind of give you an idea what they do so you can remember information about it. If you've opened up your SSO, you should be able to log right on. And let me tell you this little trick. Your class is in Canvas. I'm pretty doggone sure about that. I don't know if you looked at the Canvas, but on the left-hand column down near the bottom, there's something called Library Tools. You click on that, you will now be allowed into the research guide, and you won't have to log in because by being in Canvas, you're already past the firewalls. So by using Canvas for the research guide or to the library, that will get you quicker into the system. I hope that makes sense, but check it out. Remember I talked about and or not? Here they are. There's all this other stuff. I start with a big screen. This is not a very big database. You guys don't have a whole lot of journals like political science does. So let me do, what do I want to do? Oh, let's do flash floods. And I'm going to put a star on there, so I'm getting flash flooding, flash floods, anything that comes after the D. Because this might be something, oh, there are no results. Bummer. I thought for sure public administration would have to deal with public, probably will find it over in political science. Okay. Fire control, I didn't even put it in quotes, so it's fire and control. Fire prevention, a big deal for a lot of the Western states. I only got 10. You're lucky. But look where the things I can refine it by. Do I want to go back to 1995? The most current issue is only in 2009. Am I talking really about fire prevention? This tells me more fire, forest protection, local government. There's one article about local government, mountains, all sorts of stuff. As I look through these titles and I see something that I might like, This one's an international one. So conceptual framework for improving firefighting quality and fire. Okay. This is what it's about. It's in using the Denali. I would say it's by the authors. It's probably based on something in China. But it gives me other subject headings that I may want to look at. Firefighting, command and control at fires. Maybe that's the subject I really want to work on. I got one. There's only one in this database about it. Okay. But now I decide this is what I want. There's a couple different things I want to mention and talk about. We talked about citing your references. You can email yourself this reference, but what you want to do before you email it is change it over to APA style. So you'll have the start of your bibliography. At the end, I'm going to talk about how you have to edit them because they're not 100% accurate. But it gets me references to the article, but there's no article here, except that over here, get it at CSULB. You need to go get the article somewhere else. You got a couple different choices, depending on how we have purchased it or not purchased it. How many times have you been somewhere on Google and it says, oh, if you want a full text of this article, it's $50, please. You're thinking, I don't want it. I don't have, what is this article? 2001. Oh, yes, I do. I have it in paper. Oh, you're going to have to come to the library. It's volume 24. You're going to have to, oh, what month was it? Figures. It's issue 4, so it's the first half of the year. I'm going to have to request it. Orca is a storage unit we have attached to the library. You need to give them 24 hours to get it out of Orca because some days it works and some days it doesn't. And with it raining, it's probably not working. But say you needed 2005. Then you would have had the option to sign in. Woohoo. And maybe they're not going to give you that option. If the article had come up, you would have had a chance to sign in and request a copy of the article. Digitized basically in 24 hours and sent to you to pick up. Don't say we can't get you anything. We try very hard to get you whatever you need. But say you, I'm going back, sharing the same thing. Yep. Okay. So say I do have the article here. Administration. Wait, these are like, we don't have them. We don't have them. It will find it. It just takes a while. There it is. I have it online. Okay. What I wanted to mention with this one, this was published in 1978. Scholarly articles by APA started getting what they call the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier, in 2011, 17, somewhere in that area. So these publishers of scholarly articles went back and attached DOI numbers to all their articles that they consider scholarly and important. So when you look at the reference for that article, you may not find the DOI. Because the databases didn't go back and get it, although this one did. Interesting. They must have updated. So when I download this, sometimes I will not get the DOI unless I go get it from the publisher. So I can download it here and I can ask for the cite the article. Okay. And it kind of gives me the things I want. What I'm going to talk about near the end is how this is a bad citation in oh so many ways. it needs a little bit of editing, okay? So we're going to talk about that. That is how that database works. Are there questions? You have to realize you're not going to get a lot of results in this database because it's doing only public administration journals. And truthfully, I think there's only like 50 of them. It's a very small collection. Okay. Let's try this one instead. Let's go back and get sources and let's talk about the politics database. Different vendor, different thing. Politics database is actually a conglomerate of 3 different databases. It does policy. It does public affairs information service, which is state and local information. And it does political science journals. And by default, it does some public administration journals too. The screen looks a little different because it is different. Let's say, let's do in because it's I got 2,000 over here because it does several hundred journals. That's the big difference. But look what I can refine to. I can get just peer reviewed or the scholarly articles. I can look at books, dissertations, newspapers, magazines, trade journals, newspapers, working papers. Sometimes they do blogs, all sorts of stuff. I can limit by year or decade. I can limit by subject. I can limit by location. Say I only want stuff. Do they do anything in California? Yeah, they do. Do they do a city? You have to look because they do cities separate. So is Los Angeles in here? If you're doing anything on Long Beach, you have to do Los Angeles because everybody thinks Long Beach is in Los Angeles. You seldomly find the difference. Is there anybody else in California? Apply. I dropped down to 72. Let's say now I don't want, I want scholarly journals. Coastal risk for Latin American and Caribbean. I don't know how that fits California. Homeless near San Diego waterways. I can see where that would. So what do I have here? I have something that is in the Journal of Health and Human Services Administration. Give me an idea what the article's about. I can get the PDF on the left. I can also cite it over here on the right. Now you're getting into other things. I typed in flash flooding. Now I have people who looked at this article that I have here, and on the right, they have looked at these articles in relationship to those articles. Actually, sometimes I find some good information over here. I don't see any things here that help me today, but I now have other options to find other information that may link to what I'm talking about. Okay. That's the big difference between this database, politics collection, and the public administration abstracts. Are there questions at this point? A lot of you have all used these databases, right? You're familiar with them. Yeah. Okay. Let me go back. Under Get Sources, there's another database called ABI Inform. This used to be the only public administration option you guys had before I got public administration abstracts or politics database. It's American Business Index. But this is the one that really, really does all the trade professional journals. It's been around since the early 70s. It's got a lot of stuff in it. Let me exclude. So let's just try Flash. See what I get. Get 19,000. Yeah, okay. But one of the things I like about this database is it allows me by classification codes to limit outside of business and get organizational types, including the public sector or nonprofit. Add to my search. Whoops, what did it do? It took out my flash flooding in there. I got 58. Now I can limit by date, time, subjects, floods, emergency preparedness. Maybe that's what I'm really talking about. Are we prepared for a flash flood? Storm damage, tornadoes, evacuation, local government. These 76 articles, this breaks it down. Flood control, rain. Ooh, let's look at the rain one because I'm still getting some rain. Flood season alert, the flood warning system, how know your codes by disaster prevention management. I'm doing scholarly. Do I have any trade? I have 2 trades. Biocycle and law enforcement technology. So maybe this will help you figure out how they dealt with it in Cambridge during a blizzard. See how that fits with my flood, but there was probably a flood afterward. So their annual snow and stuff. So again, you're back to the PDF, which may be a better view to understand anything they might have, graphs or charts in a research article, lovely pictures, a trade publication. Those are the kind of things that help. So I want to point this one out because a lot of people don't realize the value of some of that kind of information that's there. Let me go back and mention, I don't have it. I need to put it back on here. On the second page is public policies, academic search complete. My guess is you will find a lot of stuff in the top 2, maybe the third one. If you're dealing with people, social index is your way to go. But if you're not sure about your topic and you haven't refined it enough, you're not sure if it's in politics or economics or public administration, Academic Search Complete is a great database to use for that. It's our #1 database because it covers at least the top 5 journals in every discipline. So by looking up something in there, you might realize, oh, I really need to go over to emergency preparedness stuff, and we have a whole bunch of databases for them. It isn't anything I'm going to put here for you guys, but that just gives you an idea. Are there questions about how to find articles? Sometimes you'll find books or reports or other sources on the web by using these databases, which we purchase for you. To give you an idea, we spend a couple $1 million on them. No, yep, how much? I think our budget is 1.5 million for databases. After you graduate, no, but you didn't hear this from me. Because we have a federal depository and state depository, our library is open to the public because we're a depository. So we have the value of, if you come in, I'd recommend a Saturday or a Sunday, and to our library, and you can get a 90-minute guest pass, which allows you access to any of the databases that are there. We do have a website that talks about what's available free out there for the public. You might check your local public library. They have some of these databases. But the reality is we pay by the student, so that's why we pay a lot. So we can't afford alumni. Alumni dues don't cover what we get, okay? I'm sorry to say that. Yes, I know. But I know that Long Beach Public Library has a couple of these databases, so I know that they're out there. Just check your local public library. Los Angeles Public Library is almost a research institute. They have a lot of good stuff in their library. If you didn't know this, with your California driver's license, you can get a library card at any public library in California. You're saying, why would I want a public library card from Sonoma? Well, how many books are online? How many movies are online? Once you have the library card, you have access to that stuff, wherever it may be. I actually have a couple public library, because I like, my public library doesn't cover everything I like. So just so you know, okay? Anything, other questions? That was a good one. I don't like to tell people, no, after you graduate, it's bye-bye. But you didn't hear from me, but you can come in and use the library. Okay? Let me go back and talk about, one of the things I talked about were books or encyclopedias specifically. So here are 3 encyclopedias that cover your areas. I'm always looking for new ones, and encyclopedias are usually multi-volumed. So these are a way to find your topic defined, find your vocabulary, think about other things that might help you. While I'm here, besides the Get Sources tab, there's the PPA Topics tab. I think I mentioned this. So these are sources from the web based on these topics that have come up from questions I've gotten from your colleagues in your department. And these are sources that I found to be most helpful for them. So I already did the Google search. I already found the things that might help you the most. And if you kind of scan over it, it tells you things that might help you. The LAO for California is great if you want to understand anything that's going on in California politics. They analyze everything for the Assembly and Senate, and there's some good reports there. I use their stuff a lot. If you're in the policy class and you need to find policies, these are the databases I recommend. They look a little different. There are actually some websites that might break down health policies, STEM policies. There are directories. So I'm going to mention this right now. They're policy directories. Basically, these are put out by librarians or organizations that put together directories of organizations that write or lobby for certain policies. So they produce a lot of data. The advantage to some of these are they also help you understand where this organization, think tank, or research group is coming from. What is their information biased? A good example is the UC has a smokers think tank, and what they're really looking at is the value of non-smoking in California on the healthcare system. So if you're a smoker, you probably don't want to read their literature because they're promoting no smoking and the value of to health. So that kind of, these directories will help you find who they are and what they do. If you're in the research methods class, you might need some of these things. Statistical sets. Here's the research guide for statistics. We've got a lot of things going. If you need how to do statistical analysis stuff, quantitative searching, more things. If you're in the program evaluation class, here are some sources that might help. This is one time that Google actually has stuff out there, but here are some tricks that you might want to think about when you go into Google. Using phrase searching like program evaluation, program assessment, evidence-based practice. And you can actually search in our database for it or Google. Our OneSearch is a version of Google, more academically inclined materials, and has all the state and federal documents. And then I've got some books on how to do evaluation. I will mention this page. I moved it to the bottom. If you didn't understand what I talked about, the research steps and how to do with the computer thing, these are a couple minutes if you want to go back and kind of understand that kind of stuff. Questions? Comments? Does this help? I do want to show you this. I'm glad. Let me show you this in case you forgot the link to the LibGuide or you're on something else. So you're in the library and say you want to go to databases. This is brand new. It's a new version of this. We just put it up. You can break it down by subjects. So there you can also do, say you really need something in, we don't have an economics. Interesting. We need economics because there's some great economic databases, but they may be under business. But why would you know that? Okay. And you search them, and this also focuses. Now, what's different about this is they're by kind of like the LibGuide. I consider this the best one. This is the second best one, third, fourth, which you saw in the guide. But here are some of the other ones, things I didn't even mention on the LibGuide that you may find depending on what you need. Okay. It always lists our newest stuff over here on the right. Clear your filters, and you can go in by types. Over 333, we've dropped 2 databases. If you need primary sources, you want media, you want streaming media, you need references, you want to find another encyclopedia. You can do by keyword. Yeah, we got several economics things. Econ Lit being the #1 thing there by the American Economics Association. So you can use that to also find materials if you're using the databases that I recommended for PPA and they're just not working because your topic's a little outside the discipline of public administration or political science or social index, which does sociology or the study of people. Okay, are we good? Are we overwhelmed? Just follow the research guide. That'll get you there. Okay, what do I want to share next? Okay. So now we have questions. Oops, I lost you guys. Am I sharing? No, I'm not sharing. Okay, hold on. Let me go down to share. There. Okay, now you're back. See if you can help me answer these questions. You can put in the chat or shout it out. The best type of article to use for research is the gossip of rags, news, peer-reviewed, trade professional. Peer-reviewed, you got it. What's another name for peer-reviewed that I mentioned? It's that or. They can be called peer-reviewed or. Scholarly. Some of the databases actually call them scholarly articles, just so you know. Okay. What about this question? Web pages and reports from the web need editorial oversight to confirm credibility sources of information. I would validate it via Ask a Person, author credentials, or Wikipedia. Yep, author credentials. And truthfully, Wikipedia has become so good that you can actually look up people who are published a lot in Wikipedia and figure out who they are and what their bias is and all that stuff. So, yep. Ask a Person is kind of outside the realm. I would do author credentials, and most scholarly journal articles usually have a little bio on the person and where they're writing from. Think tanks often include bios on people. So, reports, if they're creditable, they will give you that kind of information on their webpage. Usually under the About Them, you'll find out who's involved with it. You're kind of getting there. I'm hoping you're all getting there. Are we ready for APA citing? Woohoo! Just so you know, there are 50 kinds of citation tools. And citing it correctly is very, 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 very important. 1, it keeps you from being caught in plagiarism. And 2, if you become a famous author and you go back and someone looks at your work and they try to find that you saw, I've been doing a long-term project. I probably have 50 to 100 articles or things cited, and I cannot figure out what they are. I cannot find them. There's not enough in the reference to figure out what it is. So it becomes very important in information gathering and ways of finding things. The other thing I want to mention, some of those databases allow you, we didn't see any in politics, but quite often a scholarly article will give you the actual references, and it'll also link you to articles that other people have cited that article. So now you're getting articles that are basing their research on that. Unless they did bad research and it disappears, but that's a good way of doing that kind of thing. So I want to mention that we have citation guides. Remember, I showed you the home tab of the research guide. There's a couple APA, how to use APA things that are good enough if you don't have the book. I recommend on Amazon buying the APA manual of the 7th edition. It's fairly inexpensive used. I don't know how many of them. I use them all the time. The things that went up on the web from American Psychological Association, because all the books were in the libraries and no one could get into libraries, are not bad, but they're very brief and they don't always help. They don't have enough. So it's enough to get you through, but I would recommend you probably get the book or ask a librarian to help. There is bibliography managing software. One of the databases we have is EndNote, which is owned by one of our publishers. You can use that to download citations and to have them help you put the bibliography together, a proper citing. Mendeley and Zotero are free softwares that you attach to your web browser. Chrome or Microsoft Wave, whatever its new name is, the Edge. They kind of allow you then to gather information and keep. You're not graduate students working on your theses, but I recommend everything you look at should be put in some kind of management software to keep track of everything you look at, because I can't tell you how many people in the middle of writing their theses or dissertation say, I want that article that I saw, but I don't remember where I saw it and what it was, where it was. I don't remember. But now you've got a running annotated bibliography of things that'll help you remind you so you can actually find it again. It's hard to sometimes go back and find what you thought you saw. It's like a bad citation. You don't have enough, it's hard to find it. Okay, an APA with an article, you have your author's last name, first initial, middle initial, if they have one, and author, name, middle. APA now allows you to go up to 35 authors. You will never see that many. I think most I see is 5, maybe 6. In the health sciences, you could have as many as 35, because everybody who does any data analysis get to have their name in the author field. Then it comes with a year, in parentheses, with a period. Then it's the title of the article that you're talking about, and it's the article that you're reading. First word is capitalized, proper names are capitalized, everything else is lowercase. That's something you need to be aware of, because that's where a lot of databases can't quite do that correctly. The name of the periodical in italics, the volume number in italics, the issue number in parentheses, comma, first page dash last page. Problem here is things like ABI Inform might often say page 135, 16 pages. So you'll either have to do the math or actually look at the article, get the last page. Then I've mentioned DOIs a couple times, a digital object identifier. On scholarly articles, they will have a DOI. Trade and professional journals do not have DOIs. That's where you might do the link, the ULR. And I'm going to show you how to make sure you're doing them correctly. Say you read that the Sage Handbook of Public Administration and you want to cite that chapter you read on your topic. You can do that. Each chapter has an author, maybe multiple authors. The year the book was published, the title of the book, title of the chapter, I'm sorry. Again, capitalization counts. In the editor's names, and the difference is their initials and then their last name. The title of the book, then edition, comma, pages, the article's on, and the publisher. You no longer have to do cities anymore. Thank heavens. Publishers change cities like they change their name. They change their cities a lot. Then if it's a scholarly academic press, it might have a DOI. If it's online, you have a ULR. If you're finding some kind of report, the organization name, the year, the title of the report italicized, the agency in charge of the report, and then the link as you can find it. I hope that makes sense, because let's talk about the DOIs. These are correct. It's almost like a Amazon tracking number or whatever, you know. I don't know why people type in the DX because the DOI.org works just as well. I mentioned that there were things wrong. What happens is the database may say DOI in that, which isn't correct. You need to give it the address. Or it says retrieve from and includes all the csulb.idm.oclc.org. That's our firewall. And truthfully, no one can use it except you because you're logged in. So that kind of stuff needs to come out. What it does include is the DOI. You notice the last digits there are the same as what the proper was, the first correct example. Okay. So that's only for scholarly articles that you'll find those. So here's something from the Public Administration Abstracts. This is an old article from 2001. When it's 17 pages, it doesn't even give me for first and last page. I need to go get it because I don't have it in paper. So I go get it and it tells me it's over in Sage. And I think we looked at a Sage publication because Sage was very good about going back and giving DOIs to all their publications. So if you have to go get a journal article and it's probably pre-2017, go ahead and click on the site and make sure you get the DOI if it's a scholarly article. Oh, look, it's going to be wrong. Look at all this. You're going to have to correct it because they capitalized financing, gaming, expenditures. Australian is a proper name. They gave you all the stuff that makes you see what you're looking for. Sometimes your DOI will show up. When you cite it, you got your trends, innovation, whatever. Now I need your help. These are things that I found in Public Administration Abstracts. So what's wrong with it? Chat me or call out. What's wrong with that first one from Public Administration Abstracts? Do I have to review again? I will tell you right now, look at all the capitalization. Federal should be capitalized. Strategies induced resistance states participate should all be lowercase. HCA Health Exchange is a proper name. That's something you would have to fix. It does give you your pages correctly. It gives you your DOI correctly. Should we try another one? These are from ABI Inform. So what's wrong? Anybody? Obamacare's in quotes. That's fine. That's just the way they wrote it. The DOI, that is wrong. That is correct because it includes all the stuff that doesn't help. It doesn't have a DOI because it's not a scholarly article. So everything, there should be a period after online, and all this retrieved from should be taken out. The reason why it's ABI, remember they mostly do trade and professional. They do scholarly, but that is their emphasis. And if it had a DOI number, you would see the difference. This is all how to log into this article, which doesn't help anybody else. They can't. Okay, now we have the politics database. I know you can all see what's wrong with this one when I downloaded it. Yeah, they're shouting at you. So it should be capital A, small ll, and everything else is in lowercase. Everything else. Planning through the title of the article. Yep. And those are actual citations that I downloaded, and that's what I had to correct when I went to put them in my real bibliography. So thank you for helping me with that. Okay. So now's your chance to ask questions because I'm going to break you up and send you off to make you actually try this. So I'm going to give you the link to the research guide in case you missed it. I got to find mine again. Because you're going to want it. I'll put that in the chat. You might want to open it up. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send you out to breakout rooms, or what I call escape rooms. And let me show you what you're going to be working on. Well, I hope it's here. Yeah. You are going to, based on your room number, you're going to get, if you're group room 1, you're going to get water. Room 2 will get budget. Room 3 will get parks. I think I'm only be able to do 3. And you're going to work your way through this as a group. So don't be shy about talking to each other. It's going to ask for what words worked. It'll give you a choice of databases, which database worked. And when you get down to it, I want you also to kind of pick an article and the citation and see if you can't correct it for proper APA. Okay. The reason why I want you, I think I want to make sure you understand, and I will jump around from room to room. Okay. So 10 means I'm going to create, well, yeah, I'm going to give you breakout rooms. I'm going to make 3. That gives you 3 per room. When you get there, I will broadcast the Google form. So go ahead and go. Now, do you have questions? I was looking at what you guys did, what you found, what one worked the best.
For our group, we found ABI to be the best.
Okay. And you were looking at,
Water lead poisoning city waterworks. I mean, those are keywords.
yep. And why does that make sense that that's the best for that one? Public Administration indexes journals that talk about the theory of public administration. Politics Database talks about government. ABI Inform talks about how industry, companies, organizations work. Does that make sense? Does that make sense of what the difference between the databases are?
Yes.
Okay. So when I talked about the trade and professional journals being how we did this, that's why ABI Inform becomes very important. It does an indexing of a lot of those publications. Okay.
Okay,
Good
thank you.
choice. Anybody else? No? Okay. Let me share a couple quick things, just so you know I haven't. There's my contact information. I will do one-on-one consultations via Zoom room or at the library. And if you really care, I'm there on the desk from 2 to 4 on Thursday if you need help. The other thing I want to mention is the library itself. I don't know if you noticed when you were searching in the various things, a little a little icon pops up. Let's see, where is it here? There it is. Ask a librarian. You will find this on all our pages once you get kind of down in there. We don't put it at the top because we got tired of answering questions for people who weren't even in our country. But we have a librarian on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It may not be our librarians, but there is a librarian. For example, I'm tomorrow doing this chat from 2 to 3. So I will be covering any countries in the world that it's midnight to 2 a.m. because they're doing their research, or any other CSU or UC or community college in the world who has asked a question and they need help. So we have a way for you to get questions answered. And they'll do the same things I'll do. What words did you use? What places did you look? Let's see if we can't find something better. If they cannot help you because it's something unique to us, something isn't working right or whatever, they send a request to us to contact you the next business day we're in house, and we will then get with you and fix whatever needs to be fixed or make sure you understand stuff. And as you see this screen, I remind you that here's all the how-tos in APA right there, okay? The quick guide is what I showed you, but this is the one that gives you how to do blogs, how to do web pages, how to do reports, that kind of thing. Well, Dr. Powell, I've entertained them as much as I can. They're very light on questions.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly. Really great information. I really appreciate you doing this again for us. And this has been recorded, and so this will go up on our Canvas site. So if you need to refer back to this information that Kelly provided you with tonight, that will be available on our Canvas site throughout the rest of the term. But I know Kelly is very, very busy and has a lot of obligations, and so I'm really very grateful that you're able to be here and do this for us tonight. So thank you again, Kelly.
I love this class. You're fun to play with.
Well, we love having you. So thank you again. Appreciate
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, everyone. Let's see what we're looking at time. Let's say let's take a break until let's say 5:50. Come back at 5:50. And then we will talk about accountability and ethics. And I think that'll then take us through the rest of our time together tonight. So take a break, come back at 5:15. We'll do accountability and ethics. Okay, everyone, it is 5:50, so we are back from break. And like I said, in the last part of class here, we're going to talk about ethics and accountability. And I think I talked to you before about how we handle ethics and accountability in this program. Rather than having a standalone required course in ethics, we have opted instead to kind of sprinkle ethics throughout our entire core in some of our elective curriculum as well. So you not only get ethics and accountability introduction here in the 500 course, you're also going to get it in all the future courses as well. So you get a little bit of ethics in budgeting, you'll get some of it in HR management, some of it in org theory in terms of building ethical organizations, some of it in terms of policy and how you formulate and implement ethical policies. And then obviously, whenever you talk research and program evaluation, you always have to talk about ethics as well. So it really runs through the entire curriculum here in the MPA program. So accountability is essentially looking at the relationship between people and things. And so usually when we talk about accountability in the public sector, we're looking at the relationship between people and money. As public administrators, as bureaucrats, we are managing public taxpayer dollars. So we're kind of operating in what we call a fiduciary type of capacity, in that we are managing this money that is coming in from taxpayers. Obviously, it's not our money, and so we're kind of a fiduciary agent, if you will, in terms of managing that money in a very judicious and very effective and efficient fashion. So we're looking at the relationship between bureaucrats and the things that they manage. It is really the foundation of a bureaucracy because accountability allows for policymakers, elected officials, to hold administrators accountable for their actions. When you think about public administrators, as public administrators, we are not elected to our positions. We are hired for our positions, at least today, based upon our qualifications. So you may have taken an examination, it may have been a review of your knowledge, skills, and abilities, but you got your job based upon what you knew rather than being elected. So in order for us to have that linkage between administrators and the public, there needs to be a conduit. And that conduit is usually elected officials. So elected officials are the conduit between administrators and the public. So it's really up to elected officials to hold administrators accountable for their actions to make sure that administrators are truly fulfilling this social contract that we talked about last week in the class. The problem with elected officials doing their due diligence in holding administrators accountable is that they oftentimes don't want to do it. They don't want to do it because accountability has a lot of negative connotations. When you think about holding someone accountable for their actions, you're usually talking about something that's very negative in nature. You know, we hold someone accountable, we're usually finding out something negative that they did, something unethical that they did. Elected officials oftentimes don't want to be connected to those negative types of pieces of information, that negative PR, because obviously it's not going to help them get reelected to office. And so oftentimes elected officials will work very hard to keep their distance from accountability and will not do their due diligence in holding administrators accountable for their actions. So whenever you lose elected officials, you lose that conduit that is really the connective tissue between administrators and the public, then you have issues. And you have issues because now there are no real checks on administrators except for their internal code of conduct, their internal values, and their internal norms and expectations. It is important for us with accountability in the public sector to make sure that we are maintaining a balance. We want to have accountability mechanisms that will be capable of holding administrators accountable for their actions, But we also want to free those administrators up so that they have the flexibility to make decisions, so that they can make creative decisions, so they can think innovatively, and they're not concerned about if I do something that has not been tried before, I don't have to worry about getting in trouble for it. So we've got this real balance between holding people accountable and yet still providing them with the freedom and the flexibility that they need in order to do a good, efficient, and effective job with the public. The problem is if you have too many accountability mechanisms, and if you have too stringent accountability approaches, it's really going to then inhibit the ability of administrators to take bold action. And also, it's going to make it difficult for us to attract the best and the brightest into the public service. So you really have to try and match that balance and find that balance with the way in which you hold administrators accountable. So that then kind of begs the question of how have we done it over the years? How has the field of public administration addressed this issue of holding administrators accountable? Well, if you look back into the 1800s, as I'm sure many of you are aware, our major cities were primarily run by these political machines. And so if you look at New York City and Boston and Chicago, a lot of these major cities, just about every aspect of government in that major city was being run by a political party, by a political machine. One of the most famous political machines was the one that dominated New York City, and that was a machine known as Tammany Hall. The Tammany Hall political machine controlled most of the aspects of local government in New York City. It controlled jobs, and so it could dole out jobs to its supporters. So people are being hired into positions not based upon what they knew, not based upon their expertise, but rather they were getting these jobs because they supported the political party, they supported the winning political candidates. That entire era in the 1800s is what's referred to as the era of patronage or the era of spoils. And as we get into our discussion of civil service in a few weeks, we will talk about the different eras of civil service, the different eras of public employment. And the 1800s really was very much marked by this era of spoils, this era of patronage. In that Tammany Hall political machine, there was a gentleman who worked in that political machine. His name was George Washington Plunkett. And we're fortunate in that George Washington Plunkett decided to write his memoir. And in writing his memoir, he provided with a lot of good insight into how the Tammany Hall political machine operated on a daily basis. And so in his memoirs, George Washington Plunkett talked about things such as, he said, there is what he called honest graft and dishonest graft. Now, today, when we use the word graft, we're usually talking about corruption. So essentially what Plunkett was saying is that there is honest corruption and there is dishonest corruption. Now, that certainly sounds really strange to us today because we think corruption is corruption. All corruption is obviously unethical and is obviously dishonest. But Plunkett made the argument that there is a category of corruption that actually he considered to be honest corruption. That honest corruption, that honest graft, an example of which he gives us is, he says, let's assume that in my position working for the city, I get information that is non-public information. This is information that I have gotten based upon my position as a city employee. And that information tells me that there is a plot of land in the city that the city wants to purchase in order to use to construct a new city park. So he said, based upon this non-public information, I take this information, I go out there and I buy this plot of land at a very cheap cost because nobody else knows it's going to be used for anything. And then I turn around and resell it to the city at a handsome profit. He says there's nothing wrong with that. That's what he calls honest graft, honest corruption. He says there's nothing wrong with that because he, as he says, I seen my opportunities and I took them. So he would argue that being in that position, I was privy to this information And there's nothing wrong with me taking this information I got from my job as a bureaucrat and using it then to line my pockets, essentially to enhance my private interests. So it's a really good example of George Washington Plunkett really putting private interests above public interests. And we saw a lot of that going on during this era of patronage, this era of spoils. And so I think when we were looking at the 1800s, our approach to accountability is we really didn't have many mechanisms at all to hold bureaucrats accountable. And it was oftentimes acceptable for bureaucrats to use their position in order to try and enhance their own private gain. In 1887, though, we had this article that was written by Woodrow Wilson. And we're going to read this article in this course in a couple of weeks. This article, called The Study of Administration by Woodrow Wilson, is kind of the seminal classical article in the field of public administration. In this article, this is where Wilson tells us that it's important that we have a separate study of administration. And this is really kind of the foundation, the beginnings of the field of public administration. What had happened is that throughout the era of spoils in the 1800s, we had a lot of this graft, a lot of this corruption, a lot of this incompetence. But then after the assassination of President Garfield in 1881, there really was this groundswell of support to do something about the corruption that was inherent in this era of spoils. And so after the assassination of Garfield by a disgruntled office seeker, you ended up with the public starting to support the idea that we need to hire public administrators, not based upon which party they supported, but rather based upon their competence, based upon their qualifications. So as we'll talk about in a few weeks, in 1883, we got this piece of legislation called the Pendleton Act. And the Pendleton Act ushered in for us this era of what we call merit, where we now hire people based upon their qualifications. And then in 1887, Woodrow Wilson then writes this very famous article extolling the virtues of separating politics from administration. And Wilson's article is best known for this term, the politics administration dichotomy. Wilson argued that if we can separate politics out of administration, then if we are focusing only on administration without political influences, we can better focus on what Wilson called doing the business of government. We could then look at how we can be more efficient and more effective in implementing these laws and implementing these policies on the administrative side of the equation. Well, it's, my favorite question is, so what? Well, so what? What does that mean for accountability? What it means for accountability is whenever you are able to separate politics from administration, you are then drawing a clear dividing line between what politicians should be doing and what bureaucrats should be doing. So politicians operating in the political world, they have the primary responsibility for crafting policies and passing laws. Administrators on the administrative side, their primary responsibility is to execute and implement those policies and those laws. So once you have divided out politics and administration in this dichotomy, then if you see administrators playing politics, then you can say, well, that's unethical. Their job is to execute and implement laws. Their job is not to formulate policies. Their job is not to play in the political world. So it gives you kind of this bright line distinction between what administrators should be doing and what they should not be doing. And it makes it then relatively easy to apply ethical standards and rules and laws to govern what administrators are doing. So if they're doing something beyond just administering and executing these policies, these laws, then we have issues. We have some ethical problems. Unfortunately, Wilson's politics administration dichotomy was a little bit too oversimplified. And very quickly, within a few decades, we came to realize that it's really next to impossible to separate politics and administration. And a very famous public administration theorist who we've talked about in a previous class, John Gauss, back in 1936, pointed out that laws are not always clear. And sometimes it's impossible to translate these laws into transparent and predictable administrative actions. When you think about the way in which a legislative body like Congress operates, to get a majority of members of Congress to pass any type of piece of legislation, by definition, you usually have to keep that law relatively vague and ambiguous. The more details you put into a law, the more likely you are going to engender opposition to that law. So a lot of these laws that come out of Congress are very vague and ambiguous. And so in order to properly implement them, there's a lot of decision making that is then deferred to administrators. So through things like the administrative rulemaking process, administrators must make the rules that will govern the implementation and execution of these laws and these policies. So there is policy formulation that naturally goes on among administrators on the administrative side of the equation. All formulation doesn't just happen on the political side. So we started to recognize in the 1930s, thanks to John Gauss, that the politics and administrative world really do start to overlap with each other. And we can have this bright line distinction between the political and the administrative world, which then makes holding people accountable for their actions a little bit more difficult, because we can't just say, well, this administrator is doing something that is usually political in nature, and so therefore it is always unethical. We're no longer really able to say that. So it makes holding administrators accountable a little bit more complex and a little bit messier than it was with Wilson's politics and administration dichotomy. But our more modern approach to accountability is a recognition that every organization has its own organizational culture. So holding administrators accountable for their actions is just not the result of having these external rules that you apply to them and then holding them accountable for these rules. Actually, every organization is different. Every organization has its own unique organizational culture. So there is no one single professional norm. There is no real hierarchical chain of command that we can use to ensure accountability and ethical adherence. Instead, we have to take a much more, as I like to say, it depends approach, in that we have to look at the context of the situation. We have to look at the culture of the organization in order to understand the behaviors of individuals as well as organizations. So today we recognize that a much more contextual, contingency-based approach to hold administrators accountable than it was back in 1887 with Woodrow Wilson and his politics administration dichotomy. But this Wilson article, looking at this politics administration dichotomy, we are not done with tonight. This is something we are going to talk about again in a week or two, and we'll kind of flesh out a little bit more about Wilson's argument and talk about why the politics administration dichotomy was actually a little bit more nuanced than a lot of scholars would lead us to believe. But when we are attempting to hold administrators accountable for their actions, the question then becomes, what are we holding them accountable for? And one of the most common ways in which we hold people accountable is through what's called fiscal accountability. This is by far the most widespread way we hold administrators accountable. Fiscal accountability is concerned with whether agency officials are spending money on the programs they are charged with managing and only on those programs. So in fiscal accountability, we are looking at how administrators are spending this precious taxpayer money. And are they spending it in the legally appropriated manner in which they are supposed to spend it? So here we're looking at, is the money being spent in the way in which it's been appropriated by Congress or by a state legislature? This is a pretty clear and straightforward type of accountability. We conduct audits, and if you've worked in local government, you know that audits are oftentimes required. When I was in the school district and the governing board, we had multiple audits for all of our different fund categories. We also had audits for our bond proceeds as well. Those audits are meant to try and ensure fiscal accountability, that the money is being spent the way in which it is supposed to be spent. Second approach to accountability is what's called process accountability. And in process accountability, we are more concerned with how agencies are performing their tasks. Basically, we're concerned with how are agencies implementing these policies and programs that they are charged with implementing. So here we're kind of looking more at efficiency. So are they efficiently and effectively implementing these programs and policies that they are supposed to implement? So we're looking at the process of what the agencies and what administrators are doing on a daily basis in implementing these programs and policies. And then the third approach to accountability is called program accountability. Here we kind of shift our focus more to the outcomes of a public policy. So we ask the question, how well is this policy or this program achieving its desired goals and objectives? And so we want to see how effective this program or this policy really is. And we hold administrators accountable for whether or not they are achieving programmatic goals and objectives. So as you can see, accountability is just not one general monolithic term, and that there are different types of accountability and different things that we can hold people accountable for. Hold them accountable for how they're spending money, hold them accountable for how they're implementing programs, hold them accountable for how well they're achieving the stated goals and objectives of those programs and those policies. But regardless of the approach you take to accountability in the public sector, the solution for how you hold people accountable is, again, a solution that is based upon finding that correct balance. Finding that correct balance between external laws and rules and regulations, and then the character and training of individual administrators. You can have all the laws and rules and regulations that you want and impose those upon administrators. But if the administrators don't have the adequate training or this public service ethos in terms of their character, they're going to end up ignoring these rules and these regulations. So you have to have both an external focus with rules as well as an internal focus by training your administrators on how to behave in an ethical way. When we are trying to hold people accountable and hold organizations accountable, we also have to realize that what goes on within an organization is best known to the people who are in that organization. However, outside the organization, we oftentimes don't see what is going on within the walls of that organization. So to best know what's going on with that organization, we need to empower employees to essentially become what we refer to as whistleblowers. So if an employee recognizes that there is something unethical that is going on within their organization, they need to feel confident enough to speak up. They need to feel confident enough to be what we call the voice of the organization. So they'll speak up and they will bring these problems to light so that we can see them, that overseers can see what is actually going on within the organization. It's imperative that we provide protections to these whistleblowers, protections against things such as reprisals and punitive measures for blowing the whistle on these ethical violations. If you don't provide adequate protections to your whistleblowers, they're going to just exit the organization. They're going to leave the organization and the problems will remain unresolved. So we had a very important piece of legislation in 1989 called the Whistleblowers Protection Act. And the Whistleblowers Protection Act provided some strategies and provided some mechanisms by which whistleblowers could bring to light ethical violations that are going on within their organizations. So if a member of an organization sees there's an ethical violation in, say, a federal agency, that individual can bring that claim to the Merit System Protection Board, and then the Office of Special Counsel, otherwise known as the OSC, will then investigate that claim. But throughout that investigatory process, that person who blew the whistle, who reported that ethical violation, is protected. It's protected from any negative job actions, any types of demotions or loss of perks, or any type of reprisal they are protected from while they blow that whistle, and even after they have blown that whistle on that ethical violation. And that is really extremely important. Because if we don't have those whistleblower protections, we are not going to truly know what is going on within our organizations. And this really kind of brings up an important issue or important theory that's known as the principal-agent relationship. And so let's talk a little bit about the principal-agent relationship, why it is important, and how it works. So in the principal-agent relationship, there is a principal, and that principal has oversight responsibility over the agent. So if you think about a principal-agent relationship, the principal in that relationship will probably be something like a legislative body like Congress. So Congress has a responsibility for overseeing federal agencies and the actions of federal bureaucrats. The agent in the relationship will be those federal agencies. The problem in this principal-agent relationship is you would assume that the principal has adequate information in order to allow the principal to oversee and conduct oversight of the actions of the agent. The problem in the principal-agent relationship is that usually does not happen. In the principal-agent relationship, we have a problem known as information asymmetry. And in information asymmetry, we have a situation whereby the agent actually has more information than the principal does. When the agent has more information than the principal, then it becomes incumbent upon that agent to provide that information to the principal to then allow the principal to have the information necessary to oversee the actions of the agent. The problem with that is that there is a disincentive for administrators and for agencies to provide full information to the principal. As the more information you provide to the principal, the better able the principal is to scrutinize your actions as an agent. So the more information you give, probably the more scrutiny you're going to be subjected to. That is what's known as a moral hazard. So the moral hazard for administrators is, do I give all this information knowing that's going to make my life much more difficult through all this enhanced scrutiny that I'm going to be receiving? As we go through the ASPA Code of Conduct in just a couple of minutes, we'll see one of the principles in the ASPA Code of Conduct is to fully inform and advise. That as administrators, we need to fully inform and advise elected officials, governing board members, city council members, state legislators, so that they have the information that they need to oversee the actions of bureaucrats. So ethically, we are required to provide this information, but again, there's that moral hazard that if you do, then you're going to be subjected to a lot more scrutiny. But since agencies tend to have the information, we need to get access to that information, and oftentimes we get access to that information through the existence of these whistleblowers. And that's why it's imperative that we provide protection to these whistleblowers like we did in the Whistleblowers Act of 1989. So since we are in the public sector, and since we are public employees who are interacting with citizens in order to ensure the social contract, since we are managing public resources, the ethical standards in the public sector tend to be higher than the ethical standards that we see in a private sector corporation. And again, that's nothing pejorative or nothing negative against the private organization. It's just that private corporations deal with private money, public organizations deal with public resources. So we tend to have a higher ethical expectation in the public sector. That higher ethical expectation in the public sector oftentimes leads to a shock of ethical upgrade. whenever someone moves from a private corporation into a public agency. And I don't know if any of you have moved from the private sector to the public sector, but there really is a lot more scrutiny, a lot more demand for transparency and openness in the public sector as compared to the private sector. Another way to think about these differing ethical standards in the public versus the private sector is to think a little about the values that underpin the public sector versus the values that underpin the private sector. So if you're running a private sector corporation, what is your primary goal in that private sector corporation? What do you need to do in order to be successful in the private sector? What's your primary goal?
Profit.
Absolutely, you got it. Profit. You've got this bottom line imperative in the private sector. You need to run a profit. So hopefully what you'll be doing is you'll be creating a good or a service that is quality enough that people are going to want to purchase it. And then by purchasing it, hopefully you will then create a profit. That's your ultimate goal. If you're a private sector company and you're not creating a profit, obviously you're not going to be in business for very long. So in order to create that profit, two of the primary values that you are going to be concerned about are values such as efficiency and effectiveness. And efficiency and effectiveness are similar terms, but they're obviously not the same. It's possible to be efficient without being effective. It's possible to be effective in achieving your goals, but using up a whole lot of resources in doing that. So efficiency looks at the balance between inputs and outputs. So are you doing more with less? Are you creating more outputs with fewer inputs? Obviously, if you're able to create more outputs with fewer inputs as a private corporation, you're going to add to your profit, you're going to add to your bottom line. But in addition to that, you also want to create a quality product. You want an effective product that people are going to want to purchase. If people don't want to purchase your product, they're going to go to another corporation and purchase their product, and you're going to lose profits. So efficiency and effectiveness are two very important values that underlie the private sector. In the public sector, we also value efficiency and effectiveness. But the way in which we view efficiency in the public sector is sometimes different than the private sector. In the private sector, your inputs, your resources, your revenue will be coming from your sales. So it'll be coming from the profit that you are generating. Those sales, that profit can really be unpredictable. It can be very transient in terms of the amount of profit that you are making. In the public sector, a lot of our resources, a lot of our revenue will come from governmental appropriations. Appropriations by legislative bodies. Appropriations are much more static. They're much more constant than revenue that's coming from profits. And so sometimes there's not quite as much of an imperative to be efficient in the public sector as compared to what we see in the private sector. Also, there's oftentimes less competition in the public sector. So if this government agency is the only government agency that is producing and providing this good or this service, people don't really have a choice. They have to get this good or service from that singular public agency. In the private sector, you've got a lot of competition. If you don't like what your corporation is doing, they're going to go and buy that good from another company. So even though we value efficiency and effectiveness, it's a little bit different focus in the public sector as compared to the private sector. But what really sets the values of public administration apart from the values that underpin the private administration is the addition of more values and different types of values in the public sector. So in the public sector, in addition to trying to be efficient and effective, we also place a high priority on social equity. And H. George Frederickson is a very famous public administration scholar who is best known for his theory of the new public administration, makes the argument that in the new public administration, social equity has become one of the most important values for most public agencies. So we have social equity that we are concerned with fostering in the public sector. We have other values in the public sector as well, such as things like protection of individual rights. And so we are the keepers of this social contract. And so therefore, as we talked about last week under qualified good faith immunity, we need to know and then endeavor not to violate the constitutional rights of people that we come into contact with. So we have an obligation in order to protect individual rights. Another value is political responsiveness. And this goes back to that idea of fully informing and advising overseers. So we have to be responsive to those entities that oversee our actions. We also value a representative bureaucracy. So we want our bureaucracies, we want our agencies to represent the populations, the citizens that they are serving. So representative bureaucracy. So you can see we have additional values in the public sector, and sometimes those additional values will then at times run counter to things such as efficiency. So if you want to protect individual rights, you may be a little bit less efficient in the way in which you're using your resources because you're spending extra time on each of these individual cases. So having a different set of values in the public sector has a big impact upon the types of ethical standards that we hold people to in the public versus the private sector. Obviously, the more stringent ethical standards we have, sometimes the more challenging it is for us to hire skilled administrators while still ensuring that the public interest is being preserved. So sometimes it is more difficult for us to recruit in the public sector as compared to the private sector. Not to mention that salaries are usually lower in the public as compared to the private sectors. Hopefully the people who we hire to work in public agencies share this thing we like to refer to in public administration as a public service ethos. The public service ethos is that you work in public administration because you want to make a difference. You work in public administration to pursue the public interest as compared to pursuing your own private individual interests. We want to create a public service, as George H.W. Bush referred to it as being the highest and noblest type of calling. When Barack Obama ran in 2008 for the presidency, one of the major goals of his campaign was to, as he said, try and make government and public service cool again. I don't know how successful he was at making us cool again, but I think it's important that we bring people in who have this public service ethos and don't just understand the importance of the public operating in the public interest, but also understand how complex and complicated it is in the public sector. The public sector is just not about delivering one good or one service to your clients, your consumers, as it would maybe in a private sector corporation. In the public sector, we also engage in what's called indirect as well as direct administration. So a lot of administrators never interface with their clients. They never interface with citizens. Their job is to provide the resources that will then make that interface possible for other public administrators. But if we can bring people into the public service who have this public service ethos, who want to serve the public interest above their own private interests, it will make it much easier for us to achieve ethical adherence. So in doing your second Canvas essay, which is due next week, you are going to be considering the American Society for Public Administration's Code of Conduct. John Gauss in 1936, in addition to criticizing the politics administration dichotomy, really became the leading advocate for the creation of a professional organization for public administrators. Now, in the public sector, we as public administrators, we oftentimes come from a variety of different backgrounds. We may be engineers, we may be budget analysts, we may be HR professionals. And all those different professions oftentimes have their own professional organizations and their own professional codes of conduct. So sometimes we, public administrators, we're balancing different codes of conduct. But one thing that we all share as public administrators is that we are working in the public sector. So we all share this one code of conduct from the American Society for Public Administration. In your Canvas essay, you're going to be reviewing these 8 principles in the ASPA Code of Conduct, and then selecting 3 of those 8 principles that you feel may be the most challenging for you or your organization. And now you don't have to identify your organization if you're not comfortable doing it in your post. You can talk in much more general terms about which of these 3 you think would be difficult for an agency to implement. So I don't want to put you in a weird situation where you're talking about ethics in your organization. So you don't have to talk about your individual organization, but which of these 8, which 3 do you think would be perhaps the most difficult to try and implement? And so quickly, just kind of foreshadow these 8 principles in the code of conduct. The first one is public interest. We've talked about that already tonight. Promote the interest of the public and put service to the public above service to oneself. That is one that George Washington Plunkett certainly could have learned from back in the 1800s. Number 2, uphold the Constitution and the law. This is why we spent time last week going through the Constitution. Respect and support government constitutions and laws while seeking to improve laws and policies to promote the public good. Again, to promote the public good. Number 3, to promote democratic participation. Inform the public and encourage active engagement in governance. Be open, transparent, and responsive, and respect and assist all persons in their dealings with public organizations. We need to be open to the public. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the things we do here in the state of California that are focused on openness and transparency. We need to be open and transparent to the public, and we need to assist the public in their dealings with the bureaucracy, with public agencies. Oftentimes, people don't know how to deal with a public agency. They don't know how to navigate the bureaucracy. We need to try and promote that type of democratic participation. Number 4, strengthen social equity. Again, one of the hallmarks of the new approach to public administration. Treat all persons with fairness, justice, and equality, and respect individual differences, rights, and freedoms. Promote affirmative action and other initiatives to reduce unfairness, injustice, and inequality in society. Number 5, we already talked about this one, to fully inform and advise. Provide accurate, honest, comprehensive, and timely information and advice to elected and appointed officials and governing board members and to staff members in your organization. That allows us to get around this moral hazard problem. This allows us to truly fulfill the principles of the principal-agent relationship. Number 6, to demonstrate personal integrity. Adhere to the highest standards of conduct to inspire public confidence and trust in the public service. Obviously, if we are showing an example of personal integrity, we can help rebuild some of the trust that people have lost in the public service. Number 7, to promote ethical organizations. We need to strive to attain the highest standards of ethics, stewardship, and public service in organizations that serve the public. And then number 8, to advance professional excellence. Strengthen personal capabilities to act competently and ethically, and encourage the professional development of others. For many years in the public sector, we have been hearing about this retirement bubble, that there are all these folks who are getting ready to retire, and who do we replace these people with? Along came COVID, and we had this phenomenon known as the Great Resignation, where we saw people resigning from their positions. People were saying, well, I'd rather be home than to be spending my time 40 hours a week in a physical office type of setting. But despite all of that, we still have not really seen this retirement bubble burst yet. We still have people from the baby boomer generation who are certainly still working in their positions. But when these people do decide to retire, we need to have good succession planning in place. We need to have a succession plan in place whereby younger employees can then ascend to these leadership levels. In order to do that, we have to encourage professional development so that those people are then ready to step into those leadership and those management positions. So these 8 principles are admittedly relatively vague. They're relatively general in nature, but I think these 8 principles do a pretty nice job of kind of tying together this whole idea of what is a public service ethos and what are we supposed to be doing as public administrators, especially as ethical public administrators. So again, for your Canvas essay number 2, you're going to select 3 of these 8 that you think may be the most difficult ones or challenging ones to implement, either on an individual basis or more generally on an organizational type of basis. But this principle back here in terms of the fully informing, advising, and promoting democratic participation really does mean that we need to be as open and transparent as we can with the public in what we do. And so California tends to be one of those states that has more transparency and openness requirements than a lot of other states around the country. We are very well known as being kind of a sunshine state where we open the doors of government business to let the sun shine in. And there are a lot of different laws that help to promote transparency and openness. Again, the idea is if you open the doors and you allow the public to see what administrators are doing and what elected officials are doing, then there'll be less of a likelihood for those administrators and those elected officials to do things unethically. And so some of the examples, obviously this is not at all a universe of all the laws in the state of California dealing with transparency, but some of the more notable ones that we live with here in California, you are probably familiar with the Brown Act. And no, this was not named after former Governor Brown. It predated him, but what's called the Brown Act. The Brown Act basically requires that meetings that are being held by governing boards or city councils or boards of supervisors, that those meetings need to be conducted in the public. And while those meetings are being conducted in the public, you also then have to provide opportunities for people to participate in those meetings. And so if you have supported your city council in these city council meetings, or you watch the LA County Board of Supervisor meetings, you know that we always reserve a period of time for public comments. Oftentimes what boards will do is they'll have one public comment period for agendized items and another public comment period for non-agenda items. The Brown Act requires that you have to afford the opportunity for people to be able to speak at these meetings, but you can place reasonable limitations on the length of time that they speak. So on my board, we had a board policy that limited debate on a topic from not debate, but limited public comments on a topic to no more than 20 minutes. And then we could limit individual comments to 3 minutes each. And those were considered to be reasonable limits. They've been tested in the courts. And so it allows the board then to go ahead and conduct its business while still allowing the public to participate in public comments. The Brown Act requires that members of the governing body, members of the city council, may not engage in discussions or debate on any item that is not in the formal agenda. So if a member of the public gets up and starts talking about an item that is not on the agenda, some issue that they're concerned about that's not on that agenda for that meeting, you cannot engage in discussion or debate on that topic. And the reason for that is that you need to have a formal agenda that you have publicized to the public at least 72 hours in advance. And that agenda will then list all the topics that are being discussed. And that's the universe of topics that can be discussed at that meeting, barring some type of an emergency. So again, it's to alert the public that if you're interested in these topics, the governing body is going to be discussing these topics at this meeting, so you can then come and participate. All meetings need to be in the open and conducted as public meetings if you have a majority of the membership at that meeting. So if you have a 5-member city council, and if 3 members of the city council are involved in discussions, that must be an agendized open public meeting. Now, there's also a provision in the Brown Act for what's called a closed session as well. Closed sessions are typically used only for things that are confidential in nature. So if you have some employee discipline issues, some personnel issues, those are usually discussed in closed session and then reported out during open session. If you have some existing or pending litigation where you are having discussions with your legal counsel, that can be done in closed session, and that does not have to be done in open session. Back when we were doing these major safety modifications to our school sites, we had those discussions with the sheriff's department and those discussions with risk management within closed session, because you don't want to alert all the members of the public about any possible vulnerabilities that you could have in any of your school facilities. But it's a very limited range of topics that can be done in closed session outside of the purview of the public in open session. We also have a public records request law here in the state of California, whereby any member of the public can request public records on any topic that they choose. The governing agency then normally has 10 days to respond to this public records request. If you've ever been in a position where you've had to respond to a public records request, you know that it could be a very exhaustive type of process, because what you'll have to do is you'll have to locate, for instance, all the communication that any members of your city or any members of your district have had on this topic, whether those discussions be in terms of emails that were sent between folks, whether or not they could be also text messages. And if you are a member of city council and you have a personal cell phone and you have text messages on that cell phone that are responsive to the subject of this public records request, those are discoverable, and those also have to then be provided. And then in certain positions, if you're in a reportable position, you then also have to complete a conflict of interest form known as Form 700. A Form 700 will require you, if you're in a reportable position, to disclose any types of investments that you have that could have an impact upon the business of the government, any type of property that you own outside of your personal primary residence. So if you have any rental properties, those all have to be disclosed. Any income that you are earning from sources within your jurisdiction, that also has to be disclosed on this 700 form. And again, the reason for that is it then alerts the public to the potential for a conflict of interest, and therefore that member of the city council would then have to recuse themselves if an issue came up that could pose that potential conflict of interest. Again, that's just kind of a sampling of some of the laws we have here in the state of California for openness and transparency. But I know we're running out of time very, very quickly. So just to wrap up what we've talked about so far tonight, accountability in the public sector really does require the striking of a balance. We need to balance external controls with the internal training and character of our employees. We also need to try and balance these strict ethical standards with providing enough flexibility so that administrators can do their jobs and do their jobs well. And so that we can also attract the best and the brightest into the public service. Finding that balance is important, because we want to make sure that people are held accountable for how they're spending public resources while still being freed up to make the decisions that will make us more effective and more efficient and help us achieve all those values in the public sector. So every organization today has its own code of conduct. Here at the university, we have a code of conduct and we have expectations. Any organization you work in will have a code of conduct. Your professional organization will have a code of conduct. And then overlaid on top of that, you have the American Society for Public Administration's code of conduct as well. Since the ASPA code of conduct is the one that we all share, that's why we've decided to make it the topic for your second Canvas essay, which is due then for next week. I know we went through this information very quickly. The first part of class took a little bit longer than it usually does, but do you have any basic questions or any points of clarification on any of this information? This is just an introduction to ethics and accountability, and then you'll continue building on this throughout the rest of the core curriculum.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, sir, for the the Canvas essay, like the three points that we find are difficult to implement in an organization. When you say your organization, like what do you mean?
It would be an organization that you are working in currently or that you worked in the past. If you are not currently working in an organization, or if you don't feel comfortable talking about your organization in the context of ethics, then you can just talk about kind of more generally public organizations. So which of these three could be difficult to implement in a kind of generic public organization?
Thank you.
Sure. And then in addition to that Canvas essay and your two responses, you also have your draft advancement to candidacy form that is due next week as well. I know several have already come in. Just a quick reminder, if you are not enrolled in the MPA program, if you're in the MPH program or another program on campus, you do not have to do the draft advancement to candidacy because you're probably already advanced in your program. Just send me a quick email and just remind me that you are in another program, and then I'll go ahead and waive that draft advancement to candidacy requirement. But for everyone who is in the MPA program, it is a requirement, 5 points, to submit that draft advancement form. I'll then provide you feedback on your course sequencing and what your electives look like. And so we'll have you all ready to then formally advance to candidacy once you've completed 6 units in the program, probably by the next semester. I know we're out of time, but looking forward to next week. Next week, we're going to get into some of the significant differences between public and private organizations. And there is a very important article in the classics text by Graham Allison, Public and Private Sectors, Are They Alike in All Unimportant Respects? Please do read that article, because that article is not only going to form the basis for what we're going to talk about next week, but it'll also form the basis then for your next Canvas essay number 3. And next week, we may also start to work ahead a little bit. So if we get through our discussion of public-private differences, we'll probably work ahead into our discussion of the field and study of public administration. And we'll start having that discussion of, is public administration a discipline, or is it a subfield within the general discipline of political science? And so that's what we're planning on doing then for class next Tuesday. Okay. All right, we're out of time. Sorry, I kept you a minute late. I'll give the minute back to you sometime in our class next week. But have a great remainder of your week. Please stay dry. Please stay safe. Hopefully the rain will be over very soon. And then we'll be back together again next Tuesday. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Great remainder of your week.